Welcome to the first tutorial. In this one we're going to be handling the basic setup of entities and handles, because we won't really need to have much else set up to be able to work with that. And so here's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be making a new project. Okay, so we're going to be setting up a basic .NET Framework class library here, and I'm going to be turning on the Git repository because I'm going to be making all of this available on GitHub as well. So the class library will make a DLL that we can include either in other projects, or we can put into Unity, so we can use this framework in Unity or wherever you want to use it. This DLL will let us do that. So we're going to name our project, and it's going to be Uber Entity Component System. There we go. We've got our dev folder set up, and let's go ahead and create our project. Okay, so now the first thing we're going to be doing here is we're actually going to go and take this here and replace the Git repository that it made. You don't actually have to do this. This is just because I already have a Git repo set up, so I'm going to be going and copying this over here, and then that sets up my workspace so that when I do a commit, it will commit correctly to my GitHub repository for us. So now we start out with just the basic class here, and our solution has almost nothing in it right now. The first important thing we need to do is go into the solution and go into properties, and we're actually going to be downgrading from the version 3 or whatever it is that it has here. And if you have Unity selected, you should have these special ones down here, the Unity.NET frameworks. So we could use subset or full base. I'm going to be using full base. I don't know why you would want to use the subset. I know there are reasons, I just don't know what they are. And so it'll ask you this, you say yes, go ahead and change my project. Okay, so now that that's done, we can go ahead and close this out. We're not going to need that anymore. And we want to go ahead and rename this class from class 1 to entity. Right? Rename, go ahead, yes. And so that renamed over here as well. So that we can set up our testing framework, we're going to go ahead and just write a simple public method void test. There we go. And then we can right click this, and then we create unit test. And then we're going to go ahead, yes, yes, we like that, we like that, we like that. All of that's good. And you want to make sure you say new project, new test project. And then we hit OK. And then over in our solution, in a second, we're going to see the new project next to it that is the tests for this project. Okay, so now you can see here, we have the entity component system tests here, with the entity tests here. So you can see it named it the same. And you noticed it automatically opened up this basic test for us, which is awesome and nice. If we run this right now, it's going to, of course, fail because we're asserting a fail at the moment. So let's go ahead and change this to something we actually want to do. Since we're doing test-driven development, we want to do an instantiation. An instantiation test. This will be basically, does it work if we instantiate? And for this, we don't really have anything we need to do specifically to instantiate it at the moment. So our entity will simply say new entity. Normally with test-driven development, you want your first test to fail and then later succeed, but since we're doing it in C#, we can't really do that with an instantiation, so we just go ahead and make this, and it's going to succeed the first time we run it, which is fine. So we're going to go ahead and run our tests. And you can see down on the bottom it's running them. Build successful, so now it should run the test. We've got our tests over here, and instantiation test all green, so we're good. Okay, and we can go ahead and get rid of this method now. And let's start with our tests. What do we want it to do? We want to be able to go and have a phase, as well as testing if things have phased up correctly. Okay, so now we just make our test method here. And we're going to do test method. And a new public void phase test. That should be good. Okay, so what do we want it to do, right? So we're going to be doing basic structure is set up and then test, right? So here we're going to be we're going to probably test 2 at the same time, just so that we have 2 to make sure. We're going to initialize both. We're going to check that they have a phase. So check phase. We're going to initialize with entity E1 equals new entity, and then our entity E2 equals new entity. Now that we've got both of them set up, we can go and we can check. So we're going to say assert. What do we want? We want is not null. I'm going to say is not null. E1, and then of course we don't actually have the method yet, so we're going to say, what should we say it is? Maybe just phase. So this would just plain fail a build test if we tried to run it. So it's just going to say failed build, right? So we can't really totally test things the way we might normally do, but we want to go ahead and say both of these, and we just do the bare minimum to make that pass. So we're going to do public object. Oh, we'll just go ahead and jump a little bit. So int phase, right? And that's going to be a get with a protected set. That way we can get the object, but we can't set the object. So now if we run those, there we go, it still passes. And I think there's a key we can do, run all. So Control R A and repeat last run is Control L. Control R L. Okay. So if we just run this one, then we can, and you can see how the one we didn't run grays out. Let's say Control R L. Yeah, there we go. So it runs it again. Cool. So now what do we want to do? We want to say if it initializes, then the phase should equal 0, right? We're going to assert that R equal, and so we say what we expect, and then we say what it actually is. So then we say phase there. We can copy this, and there we go. We're going to go ahead and run it again. Control RL, run it again successfully. So we're still okay. So now let's go ahead and make it so that we can do the phase up. Setup, force out of phase. So phase up, and then we're going to phase up the other one as well. And then we're going to do a test. So test, confirm, phase up. And so we can assert. So now we want the phase to be one above, so we're going to go ahead and assert that it is on both of them. So now we need to make this method exist. So because we're doing test-driven development, we're just going to make it a public void phase up, because we want the test to fail the first time we run it. Got a builder. What are we? Must declare body because not marked as abstract. Oh, I done messed up. There we go. So now we should be able to run our tests, and it fails, and it'll say down here why. So it says not equal. It's actually 0, right? Of course it's not. So now let's do the minimum amount needed to return the correct thing. We're going to say returns, or actually void still, phase up, and we're going to say phase equals 1. Now this is wrong, of course. This isn't what we want to actually do, but it will show now our test succeeds. And this is why you want to do a failed test and then a succeed, and then we see, okay, that was bad code, right? So how can we make the test better? Well, we can go and we can run it again a random amount of times. So we're going to go and say set up and we're going to say int I equals, or C for count, equals, well, we got to do a new random dot get next int, and for I is less than C, E1, phase up. Okay, so now we're going to go and rename, and we'll make a new one. Okay, I totally forgot to add in EndUnit. So we're going to go into NuGet, Package Manager, Manage NuGet Packages, and then we're going to say EndUnit. Oops, under Browse. EndUnit. There we go, and what we're going to want is the basic EndUnit, I believe. We're going to want to install that into tests. Install. Yes, go ahead and install that. Awesome. So now what we can do is, instead of doing all this random mumbo jumbo, validate setup cert not equal, or not same, not same, if I can type, E and E2. So that's just going to say, hey, they're not the same, we didn't mess up. And then this new is going to go away, and we're going to have in here a random. So we're going to say int C, and we're going to say that it is a random. It's a random from, so we're going to have a random from 0 to, let's say, 2,000, 20,000. There we go. Yeah, 20,000 sounds good. We're going to have it run 5 times. So we'll do 5 different random values. Right. And then we're going to use this one. So we're going to say test. And okay, so we're going to phase up the amount of times that we have the random. Then we are going to go and we should now have a phase that equals the random. So if we run this, it should fail. So we're going to do Control R and then A to run all tests. There we go, problem solved. So the problem I had is I forgot that I need to leave this test class here, and I need to put the using framework inside of the namespace so that that has priority over top of the unit testing, the default Microsoft unit testing. If you put it out here, then they'll have the same priority and it can't decide which one to use. So when I type assert, it doesn't know if it should use the EndUnit framework assert or the unit testing assert. So now it'll use the unit testing framework, the EndUnit testing framework first, and then if it can't find something there, it'll fall back to the unit testing, the regular one. Okay, and you can see we've got all these tests here on the side that fail. So now, since it's going to be random, each time we run it, it's going to have different, or it should have different tests there. No, I guess it won't. So now that we have this running, we can go ahead and we can set up the proper way here and increment phase instead of setting it. So the next thing we need to do is go ahead and make a handle test. So we're gonna go ahead and clear out all of this testing framework because we don't need any of that anymore. Okay, so now we've got our handle tests here, and we're gonna initiate the handle. And we want to accept an entity. So we're gonna do... So as you can see here, having multiple tests with the same name is gonna get really confusing. For example, you know, without clicking on them, we wouldn't know which one is for the handle and which one's for entity. So what we want to do is we want to go and see them by, you know, what class they're in. That way we can separate them out. So we can go here where it says past tests, right click that, say group, and then say class. We can do a lot of other stuff like namespace and duration and things like that. Namespace will have a much longer name though. And also if they're in the same namespace, it's not going to help us out much. Duration is kind of nice because we can see what things are fast and slow if we're trying to get performance. And there's other things as well we can group them by, as well as the project they're in. But what we want is we want class, because then we have them in separate things here. So we can say, oh, these are the handles initialization test, not the entities initialization test. So now we can continue forward. Let's set up some more tests here so that we can get some more of this code going. So the other thing we should probably do is just make sure that we can go and get the entity from the handle, right? So we're going to go handle, and then we're going to say entity. So we're going to say entity here, E equals new entity. I'm going to pass in E, H equals that entity. And what we want to do here is we want to make sure that we can access the entity and access a pointer to the entity. So we're going to go and say assert not null is not null handle entity. Right? There we go. Now we can see, oh, this is airing out, right? So now we see this is not accessible because it's protected, right? So we got to go over here to the handle, and then we're going to go in here and change this entity to public. There we go. And now that problem's solved, and the test will pass. We can consider not compiling as a failed test. So now we run it again. Build error. Test already defines with the same parameter types. Oh, oops, we didn't change the name. So we need to change this to entity getable. Let's just say entity get test. Okay, so that succeeds there. So now what we want to do is let's change that to get one, and then we're going to make another copy of it, and we're going to say if the, we'll say get there, and then we'll say out of phase null. And so here what we want to do is we want to say entity phase up, and then this should be null. So it should say is null. So now we want to get null, right? So up here we can do a nice little command that says run not run tests. So that'll just run the new tests, not the old tests. And I guess it counts all of these randoms as not run. So we have this one that failed. So why did it fail? Expected null, but got a value, right? Because we are just passing this back because it's not a property. So we need to go into our handle, and we're going to change this to a property. So we're going to say get set, and we're going to have a protected set so that we can't access that. And we're going to go ahead and say that is the get method. We don't actually do anything in it yet. But the set method, we're going to go ahead and open that sucker up too. There we go. And we're going to have a private variable to do everything in now to store a reference. So we're going to change this to private. Or actually, let's just protected. Protected. I like to lock things down as little as necessary. So we do just enough for whatever is necessary. So we're going to do protected instead of private. So if anyone were to, you know, expand this handle, make this handle their base class, they could then go and access that entity directly that way. I don't know why someone would need to do that, but they could. So under our get, we're just going to do a, let's see, how do we want to, we'll do this one first because it's going to be simpler. So this is this dot entity equals value. And then this will still work because of that. And over here, we're going to go ahead and say if phase not equal entity phase, then we're going to return null, right? And then else we're going to return that entity, right? And then that way we'll have it all nice, right? Now we do need to make a phase here, and we'll generate that field, protected, and again we're going to make that protected instead of private. We're going to make it a phase because we want to be able to access that from outside. And public, we want this to be a read-only. So actually, you know what? We don't need to make an actual getter setter for that. What we can do is we can say public phase, then we can go and actually just set it up with a generic get and then protected set. That way it'll just do it on its own. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and write some documentation here, and let's document that here and there and there. Okay, so now we have it so that it is failing as we expect, but we're actually not testing a case here, right? So we need to say in phase. Oops, this is the wrong place. So in our handle, we need to go here and say entity in phase. And here we're going to say assert r equal, and we want 0 to equal entity phase as well as the handle phase. Now what we can do is we can phase it up, and then we can say here in our test we want to say the entity should be 1 and the handle phase should still be 0. Then if that's the case, we then want to say is not null. In fact, then after that we want to say is same, are same, and we want that to equal the entity, because we expect the entity to be the same as the entity returned by the handle when we are in phase. And actually we should probably go ahead and take these two here, these two lines, just to be safe. Let's bring them up to this test as well, so that we have them in there, because that's a good idea, just to assert that the state we expect this test to start in is the state it starts, so that we can know, oh, is it this test or is it a different test? Because if we ever error out in the setup area, we know that it's not this test that's the problem, it's somewhere else. You know, so maybe we found an edge case that we didn't expect. Something else changed what we expect to be the case. So what we're testing is not necessarily the problem. Something else is. And that tells us maybe if we're just running that one test, that we should be going and running everything or the other thing. Okay, so we're going to run all of the tests now that we've got this new test, and we'll see what happens. So we can see the entity in phase null test, or rather in phase not null, it should be phase not null test. We'll just call it in phase test. The entity in phase, so the entity in phase get test should return the entity, but it doesn't. So why is it not doing that? What we can do is we can look here and say expected null, or expected not null, but was null. So what we know is that this handle here is returning null for some reason. Okay, what do we see here? Okay, phase not equal. Yes, that makes sense, right? That's what we want. But oh, this is the problem, because oh, oops. There's another problem with our test. This is failing, but it's not failing for the right reason. So this actually, the handle should be being made after we phase it up, because our test here, our test case is wrong. So we want this to equal 1, right? Because we want this phase up to go up to 1, and then the handle should be storing the phase 1, right? So if we go and we run all the tests for this handle now, why didn't that one run? There we go. Okay, so now entity in phase test is failing, but now it's failing because we expect 1, but it was 0. So what's that saying is we're never actually storing the phase of the entity when we pass it into the handle to set up the handle. So over here, what we do is we go this dot phase equals entity dot phase. So this is going to store in the phase at the point where everything starts. So when this happens, we're going to store in the phase, right? And then we're going to run it again, run selected test, and it's failing again. But why is it failing? So we're on, let's see, so let's go and debug it. And then this will allow us to inspect the state of things. And we can hide the diagnostic information. We don't really care about that right now. So expected 0, the phase is 1. Oh, that is an error in our test. Our test is wrong. So we can go here and change that to 1, and then we can run the test again and see what happens. So now we can run all of our handle tests again, and we can see, okay, they're all passing. So this is our desired behavior, right? So, and we can see, yeah, that makes sense. So we're setting the entity phase and the entity reference in here. Well, we're setting it through entity, which gets passed into this entity reference here. Then we're going to, when we do a get, we check, hey, is the phase still the same phase as the entity? Like, as what is in the entity currently? And if not, then we return null. If it is the same, then we go and we say entity is or we return the entity. So we say, yes, that's the right thing. So we return it. And that's really all we need to do. There's some other things that I want to do just so that when we're using it later, it's going to be easier to use the object, so we can just simply compare it directly and things like that. It'll also speed up if we're ever using the entity as a key. It'll speed things up that way. So in the next episode, we're going to be covering overloading the operators of this object. Thanks for joining me in this video, and as always, put your comments and questions about anything you didn't understand in the comment section below, and remember to hit that like button. It'll help more people see the video.